Margaret's pain was dismissed as just part of getting old by a doctor who refused to see her real suffering. Watching the people she trusted in medicine turn away, Margaret felt trapped in a system built on indifference. But a forgotten remedy and an unexpected ally set her on a path no one could have predicted, challenging everything the experts believed. Wait until you see how this true story flipped the script on injustice, and how hope and determination delivered a stunning, long-awaited triumph. Margaret sat hunched in the plastic chair of the waiting room, surrounded by swirling voices and the sterility of an overlit clinic. The clock above the reception desk marked every grinding minute that passed, time dragging itself across her nerves. She glanced down at the note in her hands. 10 chronic pains, each one neatly itemized yet impossible to separate from the larger weight that pressed down on all of her days. Arthritis in both knees, the steady, relentless ache making every step feel like crossing hot coals. Her lower back seized up each time she tried to bend, forcing her into stiff, awkward motions. Fingers swollen and uncooperative, pulsing with the dull agony of inflamed joints, making simple tasks, pouring tea, buttoning shirts, an ordeal. Migraines that came in unpredictable waves, blinding and sharp, robbing even moments of peace. The old neck injury, gifted by a car accident more than a decade ago, threatened each morning with a stabbing reminder of fragility. Nerve pain ran along her right side, sudden and electric. Her calves betrayed her nightly, spasming with restless energy. Her left shoulder throbbed endlessly. Tendon inflammation in her hands meant even writing this very list was a feat. And underneath it all, a phantom pain haunted her legs. A deep, ceaseless ache that seemed to deny her even the comfort of sitting still. It wasn't simply pain, it was the invisible barrier between her and the world she loved. She used to keep her home immaculate, played piano for her grandchildren, and volunteered for every community bake sale. Now she could barely manage stairs, and the thought of making dinner filled her with dread. Margaret was 72. Some days that number made her angry. Was she nothing more than an object lesson in decline? Another example for the young to shake their heads at, grateful for their own mobility? The only escape she had was hope. Hope that someone, somewhere would see her as a person, not a collection of complaints, and offer help. At long last, an assistant called her name and guided her through a maze of white corridors to Dr. Harrison's office. The doctor didn't rise to greet her. He glanced up briefly and pointed to a chair. His desk was organized, his hair neat, and his tone efficient. But Margaret sensed what lay beneath: impatience, skepticism, even a subtle irritation. He exuded the sort of confidence that left little room for empathy. Mrs. Collins, 72. 10 reported types of pain: arthritis, neuralgia, migraine, back, joints. He read the list aloud in a monotone, eyes flicking across his tablet. Have you been keeping up with your ibuprofen? Margaret nodded, summoning the courage to speak her truth, despite the weight of disappointment already forming in her chest. Yes, doctor. It helps only a little, and pain is part of growing older, Mrs. Collins. Most people your age, most patients, experience similar symptoms. Try not to focus too much on what you've lost. Continue ibuprofen for now. If anything escalates, stronger medications can be considered. Something inside her leaned toward despair, but Margaret refused to let go. She had raised 2 daughters, survived the death of a partner, built a life out of nothing. Surely her suffering deserved more than a brief prescription and platitudes about acceptance. Doctor, it's more than inconvenience. I wake up every morning dreading how hard it will be just to get out of bed, to make it through breakfast, to answer a phone call. I want to be able to play with my grandchildren, to cook a simple dinner, to feel like myself again, even just once. Dr. Harrison barely glanced up. His fingers danced on the keyboard, polite but distant. Mrs. Collins, I have a full roster today. Pain is universal, and sometimes part of getting older is accepting new limitations. There's no cure-all. Try to live with what you can. Margaret couldn't respond, her throat heavy with grief. She left the office slowly, each step a reminder of the indifference she'd just been served. The weight of lost time and dashed hopes pressed in, and she drifted to a bench beside the supply closet, needing a moment to collect herself. On that bench sat Gloria, the elderly janitor whose presence always seemed calm and unhurried. Gloria wore sturdy shoes and a blue work apron, her hands broad and sure as she polished the handles of nearby doors. Her kind eyes flicked up at Margaret, reading the exhaustion written in every muscle. Tough visit? Gloria asked gently. Margaret smiled wanly, shaking her head. The doctor said pain is normal now. At 72, I'm supposed to accept it. Just take some pills and not expect too much. It's like the world just expects you to fade away. Gloria nodded, her own memories flickering. I know how it feels, honey. 3 years ago, I was struggling bad, could barely walk. Work was almost impossible. Thought my days were numbered, but I wasn't ready to give in. Margaret turned, curiosity battling with defeat. What changed for you? Castor oil, Gloria said simply, voice brimming with conviction. Isn't that for digestion? Margaret asked, not hiding her skepticism. That's the rumor. Everyone thinks it's only a laxative, but used warm on the skin, with patience, Gloria smiled. It can work wonders. My grandmother in Jamaica swore by it for aches and pains. I never believed her at first, but when nothing else helped, I tried. In 3 months, most pains were gone. Margaret examined Gloria anew, noting her easy stride, her confident hands, so different from other women her age who walked as though every joint might betray them. And you're sure? She whispered, letting herself wonder. I'm positive, but you've got to follow the steps and stick with it regularly. Gloria dug into her apron pocket, found a faded notepad and wrote out instructions. Warm the oil gently, soak a flannel pad, wrap it on the joint, cover with plastic, put a heating pad on top. 1 hour every night, wherever you hurt. After a few weeks, you'll see. Margaret stared at the instructions, tracing each letter with her finger. She folded the note, tucked it carefully in her purse, and thanked Gloria. That evening, she shuffled into the pharmacy, eyes lowered, whispering her purchase to the clerk. At home, the bottle sat on her nightstand, casting a golden glint. She thought about her education, her career, always logical, always methodical, and how none of it had prepared her for feeling so powerless. She filled a small dish with castor oil, warmed it in her hands, soaked a folded piece of flannel just as instructed, and wrapped it around her stubborn right knee. Plastic wrap secured it. The heating pad glowed softly, warmth steadily building. The room was quiet, but for her slow breaths, each inhale promising change. The first 20 minutes felt uneventful. She nearly drifted to sleep. Then gradually, weightless heat crept deeper, as though thawing something frozen at the core. For the first time in years, the steady pain began to recede. Margaret gasped, barely daring to believe. She finished her hour, carefully removed the pad and flexed her knee. It bent freer, just a fraction, enough to know something in her world had shifted. From that moment, she committed to Gloria's ritual. Each evening, Margaret prepared a fresh pad, worked through joints and muscles, marking each improvement with quiet joy. She wrote notes in her journal. Day 7. Rose from bed without bracing, amazed. Day 14. Chopped vegetables, completed dinner for the whole family, hardly paused to rest. Day 30. Descended stairs by herself, upright, steady, unafraid. 6 weeks later, at the crowded playground, the hum of children's laughter was bittersweet. Her grandson Tommy ran up pleading, "Grandma, can you push me on the swings?" Margaret hesitated. For years it had hurt too much, but today she smiled. "Of course, sweetheart." She pushed the swing, 10 minutes, then 15, basking in the freedom of motion. Soon Tommy was off, beckoning her to race him to the slide, and Margaret followed, not limping, not aching, but running. Her feet carried her, light, unfettered, her heart soaring. For the first time in half a decade, Margaret rediscovered not just movement, but the living pulse of hope and dignity, a chance to reclaim the joys she thought lost forever. Tommy laughed so hard the sound seemed to echo through the entire playground, his cheeks flushed with delight as he flew high on the swing. Margaret, hands still on the chains, felt a rush of emotion flood her. Unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest, and suddenly, tears of pure joy spilled down her cheeks. She hadn't wept for happiness in years, not like this. Across the grass, Sarah stood frozen, eyes wide in disbelief at the scene unfolding before her. Margaret, her own mother, who just a few weeks ago struggled to rise from a chair, was running, laughing, gently pushing her grandson higher and higher. When the swinging slowed and Tommy dashed off to climb the jungle gym, Sarah walked over, voice trembling with amazement. "Mom, what happened? You're actually running. How in the world?" Margaret took a deep breath, wiped her tears and managed a quiet, glowing smile. She drew Sarah in close, sharing the whole story. The day in the waiting room, her meeting with Gloria, the instructions on that little slip of paper, the bottles of castor oil, the nightly rituals, the hope she'd placed in a tradition everyone else had dismissed. She described her disbelief the first time the pain faded, the first time she moved easily, the joy of waking up without dreading her own body. Sarah listened, arms folded, head tilted, her expression skeptical but yearning. After all, she was a doctor, carefully trained to trust only what could be clinically measured and reviewed. It sounded impossible, miraculous, maybe just a fluke. Mom, I'm glad you feel good, I am. But it might just be the placebo effect. Sometimes your brain believes so much that your body follows. Margaret squeezed her hand. Sarah, love, I couldn't even stand up without holding onto the bed. And now I just chased Tommy across half the park. Call it whatever science wants, but my life has changed. Sometimes it's really that simple. The changes in Margaret didn't go unnoticed at the retirement home. She moved with a new confidence. She smiled more. When neighbors asked, she shared her story, and little by little Margaret saw a spark of curiosity in their eyes. The same one she felt back then, that first night. One neighbor, Robert, was the first to try. He was a retired veteran of 80, a sturdy man whose hands had gradually curled with arthritis until he could no longer use his cherished tools. Margaret delivered him a bottle and wrote out the steps. Robert followed her instructions, and in a few weeks his hands started loosening. 3 weeks after that, he was back tinkering in his workshop, reshaping wood and metal with the steady pride of old. Elizabeth, a quiet woman in her 70s, had suffered crippling back pain ever since a car accident a decade earlier. Years of painkillers, sleepless nights, hours spent lying awake counting minutes until sunrise, all of it wore her thin. Encouraged by Robert and Margaret, she tried the routine. Little by little, the pain lessened, her sleep deepened, and after a single month, Elizabeth quietly packed away her medication, sleeping through the night for the first time in years. George, once known for his wit, but lately withdrawn by the unpredictable storms of migraines and shooting nerve pain, followed next. After a month, he realized that weeks had passed since his last episode. Word of Margaret's miracle spread quickly. Hesitant at first, more and more residents knocked at her door. Margaret welcomed them all, filling her apartment with laughter and hope she hadn't known in so long. She demonstrated each step, patient and careful, explaining everything. The type of oil, the way to warm it gently, how to apply the wrap and the heating pad, the patience needed for real change. This isn't magic at all, Margaret often repeated, holding up the golden bottle. There's real science here. Castor oil is full of ricinoleic acid. It fights inflammation. The warmth helps it soak into joints and muscles. Our ancestors knew it, but somewhere along the line, the world forgot. Not everyone was supportive. When Dr. Harrison, her old physician, heard that more and more of his patients were setting aside their prescriptions, he was furious and worried. He arranged a formal meeting with Margaret, resentment plain on his face. Mrs. Collins, it is dangerous to persuade people to give up proven medicine. You don't know the risks, the possible complications. You're spreading hope without evidence. Margaret listened patiently, heart steady. She calmly replied, 3 months ago you told me to accept my pain. Now it's gone. Not just for me, for Robert, for Elizabeth, for George. That's not empty hope. Those are lives changed. Dr. Harrison frowned, unconvinced. Anecdotes don't equal facts. None of these effects are studied, not with a control group. Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. Journals, printouts, summaries she'd gathered over months. Here are clinical studies, doctor. Castor oil's anti-inflammatory effects are supported in respected research. No, it isn't a magic bullet. But shouldn't our first priority be what helps people, not what's profitable or popular? Dr. Harrison paged through the research, his frown tightening, then slowly loosening. Still, oversight is important. Not everyone should stop their medications. I agree, said Margaret, her eyes kind but strong. Nobody should leave their doctor behind. People deserve tools that work, whether modern or traditional. I only want to give people that choice. The story didn't end with the retirement home. A local reporter named Jennifer Chen heard about the grandmother who cured chronic pain with $5 pharmacy oil. The article struck a nerve and rippled out through the community, soon spreading far beyond. Letters poured in from every state. A young mother in Florida found for the first time in years she could lift both twins in her arms without back pain. A woman in Texas saw her fibromyalgia lessen. A retired coach in Oregon, sidelined by injuries for decades, wrote to say he jogged beside his old dog again. Margaret always answered every letter the same way, with practical instructions, encouragement, and honesty. It isn't a magic cure for everyone, but for many it's a new start. 6 months after her first castor oil compress, Margaret stood in the large, sun-filled community room, facing a crowd of new and old faces. Gloria beamed at her from the front row, a proud mentor. Margaret looked at the circle of friends, neighbors, and strangers with hope in their eyes. "I was broken," she told them. "My pain stole everything I loved. Now, thanks to a simple wisdom passed down through generations, I have my life. I wake every day eager to move, to play, to live." Margaret lifted the small, simple vial. No magic, no branding. 3 weeks of patience, and you'll feel the change. 3 months, and your life may turn around. This won't replace doctors, but it might bring you a kind of light you didn't know was possible. Robert raised his now steady hands. "I built a birdhouse with my grandson for the first time in years." Elizabeth smiled gently. "I sleep through the night. No more pills." Others followed one by one, sharing their journeys. Afterward, a university researcher stepped up to her. "Mrs. Collins, can we study this with your help?" Margaret nodded, content. "Study all you want. I know what I see each morning, and that is a life worth living." That night, preparing a warm compress for her shoulder, Margaret reflected on how a single act of faith could ripple outward. She thought of her vanished pain, of new laughter, of generations of wisdom hidden in plain sight. She thought of Tommy on the swing, and of all the grandparents now free to follow. $5, 1 hour a day, and a priceless return to living.